Okay, thank you, Mr. Chandran Nair, Club of Rome member, but also founder of the Global Institute for Tomorrow, a critique of Western-centric economical models, for being here for this first conversation for Voices for Peace. So, Mr. Nair, first of all, I would like to ask you kind of your personal definition about peace and what it means in today's interconnected world.
Firstly, Matthias, thank you for having me. I'm flattered by the opportunity and to just share. I can't say that I'm an academic or a student of the whole sort of philosophy of peace, etc. So I come from a more layperson's understanding, which I think is quite important at this point, where so much is upside down, as we see, and sophisticated arguments are being used to justify horrors from Gaza to unprovoked attacks on Iran and all of that. So we've seen that. So I can speak from a perspective of the region I was born in, which is ASEAN, the Southeast Asian region, 10 plus 1 countries. And I can say that peace in my lifetime has been marked by the cessation of colonial wars and the wars of imperial powers. The last war of any significance fought in the ASEAN region, a region with about 700 million people, was ended in 1975 when the Americans were defeated in Vietnam. So 50 years in a region that was extremely poor when that war ended, countries that were devastated, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, we've had no significant wars. And a point I will make as the opportunity arises during this conversation is we need to understand that many of the conflicts of different scales, different dimensions, are still rumblings of colonial conquest and imperialism. The Vietnamese fought the French, beat them, and then they fought the Americans and beat them. Since then, we in the region have had peace. A few minor disagreements between countries, but no large-scale wars. And for me, if to your question about peace, that is because after centuries of domination and deprivation, the countries of this region understood, despite, different types of leadership, some good, not so good, but despite all of that, that the imperative was development and a commitment to uplifting the standards of living of the vast majority. We can have a discussion about how the pathways have now created new challenges, not in terms of peace, but in terms of the question of sustainable development and all of those, which is a slightly different topic. But the main point is that the countries embarked on a journey of development to seek progress from centuries of domination by colonial powers, etc. And that created peace. The focus was on that. There were differences of opinion on certain things. So for me, peace is essentially development. We can have a larger conversation about the nature of development, what's the broad spectrum of things, but it is about bringing progress, prosperity, economic mobility to the vast majority of the population, and to create economic activity of a kind that essentially helps people overcome the drudgery of daily life, especially when people are very poor. And that's what I could say creates that. In Africa, where I had the privilege and opportunity to live in Southern Africa during the late 80s, when there were all the liberation struggles, I think the search for peace was one of those first, a search for liberation from oppression. So you have different stages at which different nations and people who were oppressed were looking for peace. First, peace from the oppressor's violence. And then, depending on the type of leadership they had, they embarked on different things. There's no doubt that some countries after liberation were unable to progress as quickly because they had bad leaders or unfortunate circumstances and continuing involvement of the oppressor. I mean, Cuba is a good example of, 60 years of sanctions and constantly all of those things, creating those things. But Vietnam, the region I come from, is a great example of strong leadership and people seeking peace through development. So that's broadly my definition. But the barrier to that is always the interference of those who seek hegemonic control over the rest of the world. And I think has become clear to the majority of the world, except many in the West who are tied to a warped ideology that anyone who criticizes a genocidal regime like Israel is an anti-Semite, uh, is a poor understanding in the West. The rest of the world sees it for what it is because we experience the unpeace imposed on us by domination and repression.
Absolutely. Earlier, you were kind of defining a little bit on your ground, on your background. You have kind of have a lot of thought and even papers and things published about Western economic model and Western colonization to the vast majority of the countries. But you also have like this great interest and I would say almost passion for peace, even when you don't have like an academic approach to that, as you said before. So what personal experiences or what led you to that interest? How is your path on talking about peace started?
I think, like most people in the world, we care about social justice. And it's important to recognize that whilst we are living in this tumultuous era of war, I think there are 50 different wars at different scales going around the world, etc. We shouldn't forget that most areas of the world are peaceful. There are mismanaged nations or regions, etc., but there isn't civil war and things like that. Clearly, any war of aggression or civil war is a tragedy, and people die. One is too many, and therefore they should and rightly attract the attention of all of us. But we should be also understand that most of the world is actually peaceful. Many people working very hard to avoid conflict, nations, given that there are forces that seek conflict. And I've written extensively about the military industrial complex centered in the United States with a strong link to the military industrial complex in Europe, which essentially economically drives and seeks war because it's an economic imperative. And therefore, we need to understand that. But most places in the world, people seek peace. So for me, it's social justice. That came from my early experience of both living in the West, where I saw in that time a lot of racial discrimination. I couldn't understand it. I couldn't understand why people would dislike and try to beat up people of a different skin color. I come from a multicultural nation where there's, of course, elements of racism, but not systemic racism, as I found in many parts of Europe then. And it's reared its ugly head again now when you see, the G7 meet and NATO meet, etc. For the rest of the world, it looks extremely racist in terms of the utterances of these people. So most people are committed to social justice. and also equity. And so when I went to Africa, I realized, as I witnessed the unraveling of centuries of decolonization in the southern part of Africa. As you probably know, southern Africa was the last part to be decolonized from South Africa was the last, but from Mozambique to Zimbabwe to Namibia to Angola, you could see what was happening. And then I understood that essentially social injustices being inflicted on people around the world was essentially one of hegemonic economic resource control of the oil powers. I mean, there's an old saying, you control the world if you control the resources. So that was what triggered it. So as I became more involved and, fortunately became a bit more recognized in circles, I just and writing and like this opportunity, I've taken every opportunity to speak openly, fearlessly, hopefully measured in a measured way to point out that this is the fact. So to your question, I would just say, I think there are many people like me, millions around the world, who want peace, who want to live peaceful lives with their neighbors, no matter what race, religion, creed, economic status. I want to be left to their own devices to do that, but there are forces, and I mentioned the military industrial complex. I also mentioned the old imperial order, which can't adjust to the new multipolar order and thus inflicting turmoil everywhere, as we're seeing with the new US administration, etc., and sadly also in Europe. And so people like me, I feel we have a responsibility. We have been granted a bit of a voice. And so if we keep silent as well, then who will speak up? For the majority who want peace, at least I can say those of us who have experienced the unpeace imposed on us. So I use the privilege of the window of opportunity I have, where maybe a few people will listen, to speak out fearlessly about this issue, and that's my motivation to do this. It comes with some risk, as you probably know, but I live in a part of the world that I can say is free of what is going on in your part of the world, Europe and the United States. I can criticize the genocidal regime of Israel and not be put in prison or threatened with a legal note. I can criticize my own government too. So we were deemed the people who did not have freedoms of speech. Well, now we know what freedom of speech was actually a facade in the West to promote um, a liberal veneer, but no one believed in it. And I don't know if you know, but I think it was just last week, an 83-year-old woman in the UK was arrested uh, for uh, for speaking up at a protest as a pro-Palestinian supporter. 83-year-old woman in the country that lectures the rest of us about freedom of speech and oppression.
And fundamental rights.
Yeah. An
Yeah,
83-year-old woman, by the way, just was saying she supports Palestine.
this is amazing. Um, recently, more than a year ago, a survey came out conducted by this organization called Youth Talks, in which they interviewed over 45,000 young people over the world in different regions, and asking them what were the kind of the topics, the global topics, the global trends that they were the most worried about, or the themes that they cared about the most. And peace came as the number one topic in most of the youth, like over 30% of the surveys answered that peace was their main problem. Um, but now it seems like there's like this clash of titans, right? Like Israel and the US, and it seems like everything is so far away. Like what would you say to a young person that's passionate about peace and that wants to do something that makes the world a more peaceful place, that they could do um, to achieve that. When we talk about the lack of peace, and it seems like so huge.
Good question. I would say, and I don't want to sound like some prophet leader or whatever, because I'm not, but I would say to anyone, but especially if you're young and looking to the next 40 years of your life, and I would say now is your time. Now is your time. Um, the perpetrators of violence, war, economic hegemony seek every means to intimidate us, seek large-scale intimidation through violence, disregard for laws, etc., to essentially impose and attempt to rewrite the rules. So many red lines were crossed in the last 2 weeks when Israel and the United States attacked nuclear facilities in Iran. You can disagree with the Iranians on many things, but there are norms of war, etc., which do not allow you to attack nuclear facilities. So that's the breaking of every rule. And the Europeans all said Israel has a right to defend itself. And you might be confused, but it was Israel who attacked Iran, right? So turning everything upside down. So we, the youth, and the youth and anybody else, this is our time. You need to stand up. You need to be vocal. Do whatever you can. The intimidation will be full on, as we've seen now in Europe. University students cannot speak up. In the USA, it's almost a police state. But this is your time. And I think what's very important to support the young people who are being oppressed in the so-called developed world, the regions of the world which talked about freedom and rights and civil liberties, all the French stuff about liberty, etc. But you can't say anything about the genocidal regime of our times. It's for those in other parts of the world, in Latin America, in Africa, to be in solidarity. And it's almost a reversal of the roles from before, where the oppressed people of the so-called developing world required the support and moral support and solidarity of young people from the more advanced parts of the world. But today, when you refer to the students and the young people, I get a sense you might be referring to the young people in your part of the world, your country, Europe, etc. They are feeling hugely under pressure, but this is their time to actually be stronger than ever. They will look back at this time as transformative in the understanding of the world. One should not forget that the Western world, the United States government, all of those, and particularly those people who have remained silent about the genocide, will have to live through this for the next 30, 40 years. The generation of young people in the US, Israel, Europe, who have supported or been silent will have to live through this. If they are 25 years old, when they're 50, their children will ask them, so mommy, daddy, what did you do to stop the genocide? Because this will go down as the genocide. So I think young people today should remember they will be asked questions in 25, 30 years. This is your time to change, despite, as you said, the almost hopelessness of the situation in terms of the total disregard for rules of law, etc. When you have the Secretary General of the largest military industrial alliance, NATO, speaking like a child in front of his daddy, the President of the United States, you as a young person must be wondering, what norms are we living by? What sort of standards? How do we govern ourselves when people like this are in charge and paying obedience to individuals who seem to have no care in the world about breaking every rule? So I would say, stand up, be counted, do your little bit, get organized. This is your time.
Thank you very much. Well, on a topic that's somehow related, because if there's a space where youth people inhabits and performs a lot of activism and organizes, it's in the internet, right? In like in the virtual spaces, and you've warned about the uncritical embrace of technology. So how can we work, or how can we ensure that technology actually serves peace rather than division or domination?
Yeah, I mean, it depends at which level we're talking about, of course, right? But if you're talking about technology from the point of view of the owners of technology, I think there's just a new report released by the UN last week, by the person who is overseeing the UN's efforts in terms of bringing managing the the dire situation in Palestine, and a report last week that essentially showed and listed a whole range of companies that are benefiting from the genocide. And these included consulting firms who are doing analysis of what it would take to relocate 500,000 Palestinians. It's one of the top four consulting firms. I will not mention them here now, but anyone can go and research it. But it also listed all the tech companies as complicit, especially the US tech companies who have been so frightened and at the same time emboldened by the new president that they have forgotten all their mantras about doing good, etc., and have just said, okay, I will do whatever you say, and have become complicit. And I think that is part of the military industrial complex as well. So that's at the industrial scale, the owners of tech, and we should be extremely wary of those things. Now, then when it comes to us being users of that technology, well, there are several dilemmas, and I won't go into all of those, but there are lots of social media platforms, etc., that are owned by the same people, and every time we use them, we make them more powerful. Every time you use Facebook and all of these things, you essentially empower the tech companies. There's no running away from it. So I would just say that we can't give them so much power, so we have individual actions we can take. There is a little campaign I think I came across early this week that is urging people to stop using their technology, their mobile phones for half an hour or an hour. I don't know if you've heard of this, to essentially send a signal, because the system is so complex. If if a billion people, young people, coming back to your message, if a billion young people stopped using at a certain time, and that campaign, someone can go and Google it, and you can send it around, stopped using their mobile phones for an hour, it will show up on the internet. It would be a warning signal. But this is in solidarity with Gaza, right? So you could do all of those things. But more importantly is then what do you use it for? And I think a problem here is to think I've done something because I've engaged in social media and a chat. I don't think that is enough. I don't think that is enough. So I think the power is to use it to get the right information. That too is double-edged because there's so much nonsense around, and we all know about how you can get down that extremely dangerous black hole of conspiracies, and it can screw your mind up. So you can get mentally ill if you're very concerned. So you need to essentially be able to separate yourselves from going down the dark hole of seeing, babies decapitated and all of those. That can make you sick. When the Germans were committing the genocide of Jewish people, we didn't have live streaming. We didn't have every image of Jewish people being sent to um, the incinerators. We didn't have those. There were still photos that came out many years later. But now we see it. So it can make you sick. Then the other bit is if you think you're just communicating, we know the trap that gets you into. So I would say use technology provided you have a clear path of action, a clear path. Get organized, like you are doing for 50 Cent. Now you're using technology. You are going out and getting organized. And once you get organized, then use the technology. But remember, the technology is simply a tool. What you really need to do is understand with clarity what is it you're trying to do. So if you are in a small town in Latin America, India, or Africa, you can get organized. So that I don't think there is a substitute for essentially getting people together for a discussion. Old school, town hall meetings, getting people on the street. No, I'm not promoting violence, getting organized. That way you really get mobilized and then do things, right? So I would say don't get technology as a tool, use it, but don't be seduced by the fact that you send 100 messages and therefore I care. And I had a conversation with my friends about how awful all of this is, where you probably didn't change anything. The best thing to do is change something locally, get people involved, and use technology in the way you want, but don't let the technology rule you.
Thank you. This is amazing because most of the times we tend to think when talking about systems thinking, for example, that there's sort of a magical solution, right? Like this, we're going to find like the key that opens every door. And when true systemic transformation comes when we actually spend time with people, trying to talk about what's wrong in our reality and how we can change it and trying to settle a common ground for everyone. So this it's a very powerful message of just stepping out for a bit from technology and from social media and trying to actually do something in social reality.
Yeah, I mean, there's a great difference, as you know, but we all forgotten between in-person conversation, a virtual conversation like we are having now, and then just sending text messages around and thinking we've done things, right? So there's a great deal of difference. And ultimately, you have to get people organized in the real world. Use the technology. And in some situations, the virtual world is an enabler, but it's also often fleeting. That's what I found. But when you meet people, you shake someone's hand, you're all in a room, you feel the heat, the energy, the vibrations, and then the debate, the discussions, the arguments, then you mobilize people truly. Technology, I don't think, touches the soul as much as when I see you in person, Matthias, and I shake your hand and I can feel you in my presence and vice versa.
Thank you very much. um So we are probably approaching to somehow the end. I think we have some time for a couple more questions.
Sure.
But maybe going a bit down that path. Do you believe that there are any myths regarding peace nowadays that we should kind of address?
Any what?
Any myths,
Needs.
mythology?
Okay. Yes, yeah. Oh, there are lots of mythologies being created all the time, as we know, around this. And again, not to overdo the Gaza thing, but the mythology is that Israel has the right to defend itself by attacking and launching unprovoked attacks on other countries. The mythology that any nation that doesn't see the world through the lens of the Western neoliberal system is a threat to the world. The mythology that there is a world order created by the West after the Second World War, which is the most perfect system, and you can only trust Western powers, and nobody else can do that. The mythology that colonialism was actually a global good. The mythology that has scrubbed out the genocide committed in the creation of nations like the United States, Australia, Canada, etc. So there's a ton of mythology. Much of it is what we were taught as history. I call it his story. I mean, it's not my version. It's his story. So there's a lot. So there's modern day mythology now being created as well. And coming back to technology, the mythology that technology is the panacea for all our ills. This is a this is a myth and a lie that so many young people have bought into because they don't know better. And part of that mythology is being reinforced by the education system, which is outdated. The education system, which in turn also seeks to essentially make captive any young smart person to the modern economy and its workings. A modern economy which is actually not that modern, but actually very archaic. It's extractive, it's exploitative, it externalizes true costs. But if you are coming from a middle class background, and if you have the privilege of going to a good school, etc., that entire system is not changed. It's still teaching you the same old things that essentially shaped the world during the East India Company and all of those things. So there's a lot of mythology embedded even in the economic system. The mythology that if you create the economic mythology that if you create a big pie, then the gravy will trickle to the poor. Well, we've seen this has not happened at all. The gravy is too thick. It doesn't. So there's a lot of economic mythologies that are embedded in classical economics. The mythology that all of us can be rich, there is no such thing. We can't. What is richness? And I'm not talking from a philosophical point of view, but just in terms of material needs. The idea in my first book was about this, that we will have a population in our part of the world of about 6 billion people in about 2050. The mythology that 6 billion Asians should and can aspire through the economic models that are being forced down our throats, the Western economic model, that we can all be rich and live Western lifestyles. But this is a myth and a lie. We can't because there's not enough to go around. So across the spectrum from economics to the way history is told, to politics, even to the way academic curriculums are designed, embedded in it is mythology. And a lot of the mythology is premised on preserving the old order of the dominance of colonial powers. And we have to break that. So coming back to young people, critical thinking, which is what my organization's very much immersed in. And you probably know that on the Environment Sustainability Fund, I've written a book called The Sustainable State, where I argue that freedoms, the mythology that everyone can be free in the way that is naively and described by Western liberal economies. So what is freedom? So the mythology that our rights can be unfettered, we can have everything we have, well, we can't. But we do have some basic fundamental rights that's where I talked about how peace and development are tied, and you need good leadership to do that. And there are trade-offs. So there are many mythologies on all of these things, but one of the mythologies that I'm very focused on is the idea that the people in the developing world should aspire to live the sort of unsustainable, bankrupt lifestyles taken for granted in the so-called first world. We should reject it. We should reject the idea that democracy, as defined in its perverse way by the Western powers, is not the only way to organize large societies in an era of existential threats. So, what is democracy? Is the United States a democracy? I don't think so. Right? So, all of these things young people need to question and do not be force fed. And then finally, I would say, this mythology that there's some net zero future. Well, this is unscientific nonsense, and I've written about it, as you know. So we have to question, and we have to question because the old order is very reluctant to give up power. More importantly, it's incapable of seeing a different future. And that future that we have to design, and particularly your generation, has to be driven by science, sound economics, and common sense. So I will often cheekily say that before you rely on AI, please understand A stands for artificial. Rely first on your BI, which is your basic intelligence, and rely on your CI, which is your common intelligence. And don't become DI, which is having delusional intelligence. So B and C is the most important: common intelligence, basic intelligence, critical thinking, asking the questions, understanding that the ideas of the last 50 years are past their sell by date. We have to reinvent. So when we talk about innovation, it's not about technology, it's innovation of the mind. To critically examine what's around us and ask the unthinkable questions, because if you do, you're probably on the right path.
Thank you. Maybe since we have talked of quite a grim scenario globally, and going to probably one of the final questions, what gives you hope in this world?
Oh, yes. We talked about the grimness, but do remember I said most people live in peace. So
Yes.
again, we need to be really careful that people like you, me, who have the privilege of engaging in these issues, etc., and we do, and rightly do, address injustices, etc., don't see, and when we talk about it starkly as we are doing now, we don't paint it as grim. I think this is very important. I'm often asked when I talk about the environment and sustainability, Chandran, you're so pessimistic. I said, no, I'm an incorrigible optimist. Everything can be done, can be changed. But it won't be if people like me and you keep silent and don't let others engage in a conversation, not with me or you as a teacher, but as people who've had the privilege of engaging in these issues and thought about it a bit more. So we need to put it out there. And when we put it out there, some of the data will be startling. We all know that. But how are you going to solve the problems and transition, transform, regenerate, whatever the word you want to use, if you don't confront the reality? True innovation, true spirit of doing comes from confronting stark realities, but not getting down. So for me, hope is a nice word, but it's beyond hope because hope is not a plan, right? So people are just hopeful. No, no, no. I don't want to talk just about hope. I want to talk about confronting the reality getting motivated, getting energized. I'm going to do things. That means managing a lot of inner demons as well. All of us who care live with demons, as you know. And that's why a lot of people don't care, also because it's too difficult. If you are in a position of power, but you do care, you do know, but caring takes you to another place of pain. You know what I mean? It's a place of pain. And so the challenge for people like you, others in your international network, and particularly young people, is not to let the pain hurt you. It's to get the pain to not say there is no hope. And so then you search for hope. No, no, no. It is to say, this is going to motivate me because I've discovered another truth. And now I'm going to find solutions because the majority want me to help them. You know, when I say individuals, those of us who can have, who are motivated enough to project positivity and come with solutions. So I would change the narrative, and I'm glad you asked me that question. It's not about doom and gloom. Nowadays it's simply about hope. It's about doing, and it's getting energized, having fun, smile on our face, confront the realities, but don't have a smile on your face and just enjoy your life by being in denial, which is unfortunately what a lot of people in power do. Because to confront the pain is to also confront their existence. And that's the difficult thing. And in a way, people like you, the people who work with you, you're the free souls. You're the ones looking to change things. And the trick is to not get overburdened, that you get disillusioned, and never say there is no hope. But it's not about hope only, it's about doing things now.
Thank you. Maybe as a final question, if you could make one call to action, kind of globally to youth, uh, what would it be? You already said now is your time. What how would you put that in maybe into action?
If I was to call to action to young people, but I'm also extremely aware there are a lot of middle-aged people who are also in the same boat. They're not old yet. They got a lot of energy left. So generally, but to your point about younger people, the first thing I would say call to action is pick one topic that is really important to you, which you can engage in that is not in your self-interest, because a lot of people I've seen too, and this is a trap for young people, getting superficially engaged in things without actually understanding the true course, because they are too seduced by lots of myths, right? So pick something. And if you're young, I always say start something to focus on something in your backyard. Please don't go global yet. It's all very cool to go global, but do something at home. So I'm always, when I meet young Americans and Europeans who come to Asia, want to help, etc., I said, my God, please go home. Because the best thing you can do is change your governments, enlighten your political system, reform it. We don't need you yet. We would like to have you. There's no doubt about it. Come. But my God, we know we will fix our systems first. So always begin by saying, young people, pick one issue. It could be peace. It could be climate. It could be good governance in your country. It could just be safety, security. It could be something as simple as littering in my city. Pick something, but it is hard work. And then do the miles before you have the credentials to care about the world. But it's too easy to go global and just go on the internet and say, I care about those people in Palestine. Good, but do something locally. So if your government is saying in your country or any country You can't say anything that suggests that you are pro-Gaza or the Palestinians. Then work hard to organize against that oppression. So I would always say pick one thing, first start locally, then you've got the credentials, then you have a voice, go global. But don't be so in a way naive and almost arrogant. Just think, well, I have access to all these people around the world, so I'm just going to talk about climate change in a very superficial way and about, these poor countries. Well, you can't do anything for us. Change something in your country first. And if you're from a poor country, help your country. And don't help it by simply turning to narratives that talk about, displacing your government, etc. Work with the system, improve it. That's a lifelong commitment too. And that's good work. And that's where I think people add most value. So that's my advice. One thing, take one action, call for action, make it yours, start locally.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We are 1 minute after what we said this will take, but
Go ahead. I've got time.
one final message you would like to share?
Final message is, I think peace may seem elusive, but peace exists in our midst. So let's not be dismayed by what we see. Peace exists in our midst. If it's not for peace, the world would be on fire everywhere. Many countries continue to, struggle within the midst of a globalized world in which there's conflict and where the ability of a few countries to disrupt global systems does cause distress, but we are living peacefully. So I would say don't get dismayed. Peace does exist in our midst. What we need to do is to tackle and confront the key sources of the the deep conflicts that are happening in certain parts of the world. None of us can say, well, I can't care about what's happening in Gaza or what's happening in the Sudan or what's happening elsewhere. So the message would be don't get dismayed. There is a great amount you can do. And don't get distracted by media, which can either sway you into believing that there's all these evil forces and that those who make war are actually trying to make peace. They're not, or that the world is on fire. There are many challenges we have. I mean, clearly on the environmental sustainability front, we are being past the tipping point, in my view. So, but there's many things we can do, and we can reverse those things. We're not going to reverse the climate change temperature rises, but we can live within those limits if we change certain things. On the war side, if you're in North America, if you're in the USA, change your government. You have a lot of work to do. I think it'll take 2 generations. Get better leaders. So that's my message to, working hard for peace. You have to work locally to get your governments, etc. But you also have to understand history. You have to understand why your government is working in a certain way. So, where in Argentina, your current leadership is aligned with the US government, you need to understand why all of those things happen and then start to transform the nature of your societies.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for being our first guest into this series of dialogues for Voices for Peace. And thank you for the work you're doing for peace.
Thank you. Thank you, Matthias, and thank you for being a leader in taking on these issues and spreading it. And thank you for having me as your first guest. I hope I added a bit of value, and I look forward to engaging in this conversation with you.